You're listening to episode 176, Deaf, Deaf Plus, and Hard of Hearing Support with Barbara Hecht from the Clarke Schools. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. I'm so happy that you're joining with us today. We have a really special episode where I got to interview Dr. Barbara Hecht. She is from the Clarke School organization, and she's going to tell us all about that. But one of the reasons I think it's so important to listen to some of the resources and community organizations are out there is there may be resources that you, a family member, or the patients that you work with, or you yourself are looking for that you don't even know that exist. And then you hear about some place like the Clarke Schools and Dr. Hecht, and you get to see the impact that so many organizations are making in families. One of the things I learned during this podcast is the term Deaf Plus. So when you hear her say Deaf Plus, is referring to when a patient or a child or an adult has deafness plus another ongoing condition or different ability. So I'm so grateful. I learned so much during our conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join you. My name is Barbara Hecht, and I have a very long title. I am currently the National Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at the Clarke Schools for Hearing and Speech. Clarke is actually an organization that began in 1867, so quite an old organization with a very modern take on things. And I'll talk maybe a little bit first about my background and how I got interested in the field of hearing loss. I actually started becoming really interested in children with special needs when I was in high school, and I was volunteering at a school for children who had intellectual disabilities. And then in college, and actually even beginning in high school, I became very interested in linguistics and language development and the particular language learning difficulties that children with various disabilities have. And I actually started, when I was in college, working with an organization that was very heavily involved in developing the Massachusetts version of what later became the Individuals with Disabilities Act. So some of my mentors were really involved in helping to formulate that law and helping to ensure that all children had the right to a free public education. And I began my career teaching as a faculty member in special education at UCLA in California. And then actually through my graduate students, I began to learn about the field of hearing loss. And I started to meet families of children with hearing loss and other professionals in the field. And I was hooked. I really felt that this combined my interests in working with children with special needs, but also language development, which is really the core of the concern when a child doesn't have access to hearing.
Wow. It sounds like this is one of those, it's not a job for you, it's a calling. And it has been at you since you were even in high school, which is incredible.
Yeah. And I worked in the field for a number of years. Our family lived in Los Angeles for more than 30 years, although we are New Englanders. And eventually, and I became the director of a program for deaf and hard of hearing children in the Los Angeles area. And then an opportunity arose for our family to move back home to the Boston area because there was a position available at Clarke Schools for hearing and speech. And so I was the director of that program, which really focuses, I'll tell you a little more about it, but focuses on children with hearing loss from birth really through high school age. And so I was a director of a program in the Boston area for the past decade or so, and then took on this new role at Clarke, looking at all of the Clarke locations and campuses. Clarke Schools actually have campuses not only in the Boston area, started in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is in the center of the state. And then we have campuses in Philadelphia, New York, and Jacksonville, Florida. So I'm now in a position to be looking at some of the needs and issues that affect our organization Clarke-wide.
Wow, well, they're really lucky to have your wide lens and perspective and experience there. It's safe to say probably that you have talked with hundreds and hundreds of families who have dealt with either intellectual abilities or profound hearing loss and everywhere in between. What do you hear most often from parents at the beginning of their journey? And what are some of the things you find yourself or your staff saying to support them early on?
Since I've been in the field, so many changes have occurred for the better. This is actually probably, I often tell our staff and new teachers that this is one of the most exciting and rewarding times to be in the field of deaf education, because we now have the technology and the ability to identify hearing loss in newborns. And that was not the case 20 years ago. And now in our country, more than 99% of children are actually having their hearing screened in the hospital before they leave. So if we can identify hearing loss, which is often an invisible disability, if we can identify it early and start early intervention right away, we have so many more possibilities that then open up for those children, because the earlier we can start, the better their prognosis will be. So we have that technology to actually screen for hearing loss and then actually do full-scale diagnostic evaluations. And the goal is to have all of that done by at most 3 months of age. And then to ensure that children can get into early intervention and also get the technology that they can use to access sound. And huge advances in that as well, not only advanced hearing aids, but also cochlear implants, which you might have heard of.
Yeah. We've had some families share on the podcast and some that I've worked with in the past who have cochlear implants and have made that decision. And what an exciting opportunity. It's not so often in medicine that you get to say, I feel really confident about this diagnosis. And there are interventions that we can do. So often parents are left without answers. And it's amazing that you've been in the field and can say, this wasn't the case 20 years ago. What do you think parents should be looking out for in terms of signs and symptoms of hearing loss? And I know your organization is doing a lot of awareness around CMB. Can you explain that to us a little bit and talk about that specific diagnosis and how it corresponds with hearing loss?
Yeah, I guess let's sort of maybe step back just a little bit. First of all, there is screening, newborn hearing screening. most of the time that actually doesn't mean that the child after diagnostics will have be diagnosed with a permanent hearing loss. But it's really, really important to follow up on that screening and get the diagnostic evaluation right away. And sometimes that hearing loss that might have been picked up in the screening is temporary because of fluid from during the birth process, fluid in the ears. But at other times, it's very important, no matter what, to follow up, because the sooner we know, the better. And hearing loss that goes undetected really then is a serious risk factor in all areas of development. The diagnostics in the newborn period are really critical, but then the question is, what if your child is not appearing to notice sounds or not developing spoken language? It's very possible, because there are many forms of hearing loss that can develop after the newborn period or can be progressive. It's very important for parents to just go with their gut. And if you're worried about whether your child is hearing and hearing well enough to hear speech sounds, it's really important to push for a full audiological evaluation at any time. And before newborn hearing screening, the average age of diagnosis was 2 or 2.5 years of age. And now we're really diagnosing sometimes within 2 weeks. And that difference makes all the difference. But then after that newborn period, it's really important to follow up on your gut. There are 2 major causes of hearing loss: genetics or some non-genetic causes. For example, viral conditions that a parent might contract during pregnancy. And you had mentioned CMV, which is cytomegalovirus, quite a mouthful. But CMV is one of the major non-genetic causes of hearing loss in young children, and it can be progressive. So there are actually efforts in many, many states right now and groups nationally trying to get CMV screening as part of the standard of care for newborns. But certainly if a child shows any indication of a hearing loss, it's critical to be tested for CMV, because there are actually some medical treatments now that can possibly reduce the progression of that virus. What's tricky about CMV is that many of us have had it as children. It sort of appears to be like a bad cold or even a mild cold. And yet, if a mother gets CMV during pregnancy, it can have very devastating effects on the developing fetus. So testing for CMV and just raising awareness of CMV is so important.
So this is something that if a parent who is pregnant has not been asked about, that they can and should ask their doctor about.
They should. And in particular, people that are really pushing for more awareness of CMV really want parents to know that CMV is likely, it's very common, and it's likely circulating in daycare centers. And so if this is a second pregnancy, if a mother is pregnant and has a child already who's in a group daycare kind of setting, that could be an additional risk factor, and they should talk to their doctor about prevention measures and making sure that they're using, universal techniques for just preventing spread of illness. And the other thing to be aware of is that somebody who is pregnant and working with young children also needs to be really aware of using universal sanitation methods and that sort of thing. So there's a growing sense that we need to make people aware that this is an important condition to sort of be on the alert for.
Yeah.
And that if identified early, there really are some measures that can be taken to either reduce or almost eliminate the impacts, the serious impacts of CMV.
Wow. Well, that's really helpful and, quite scary for many of us because if it's your second child, you likely have a child in daycare. In my profession, especially, we tend to be young women in their 20s and 30s of childbearing age. And so it's good to be aware of these things and just take proper precautions.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you have to suit up in a hazmat suit or something,
Exactly.
but just some awareness is really important. And then always, I would just recommend that parents, or pregnant women really talk to their doctors about this and whether they should be tested to see if they already have antibodies for CMV. I think there's just a general awareness now that we need to get the word out.
Great. Well, thank you for doing your part. I have a question kind of around, once you receive a diagnosis or perhaps you're going through the diagnostic process, we talk a lot about on this podcast how parents have the opportunity to choose their care team. And that means there should be a spirit of collaboration between you trusting your gut and being able to feel safe in saying that to your child's provider. What other elements in terms of a multidisciplinary approach should parents be looking for when it comes to investigating or diagnosing or dealing with hearing loss?
Yeah. I think it's important to know that somewhere between 90 and 95% of children with hearing loss are born to families where there's no knowledge or history of hearing loss. And so it really often comes as a shock, a terrible shock to families. Most parents have told me that they never knew another deaf person till it was their child. And so finding support groups and finding other parents and really asking your initial providers to point you to resources in your area is critically important. Any child diagnosed with a hearing loss would be eligible for early intervention in every state, but states have different criteria for degree of hearing loss or type of hearing loss. But in most cases, parents do have to be they have to be good at self-advocacy, I think for almost any disability. But especially in this field, because pediatricians, this is a low incidence disability. Only about 1 or 2 in 1,000 infants are born with hearing loss. So it's very likely that pediatricians have not come across hearing loss necessarily in their practice. And so just being that, sometimes I call it the pleasantly persistent parent, just persisting if you have concerns and making sure that you're getting referrals to early intervention and then getting support within the early intervention system from people who have special expertise in the area of hearing loss. It really is a specialty area, and not many people really have that strong background, but push for it as a parent.
Wow, that's really helpful. I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the things that the Clarke Schools does and how wonderful it is if you're in one of those locations. But this is a national podcast, and so we get to spread the amazing work that you're doing right now through raising awareness. But what else do the Clarke Schools offer? And if you're not in one of those locations, what should you look for in education or school for your child if they're dealing with hearing loss?
Okay, great questions. So first of all, just a little bit more about Clarke. So we have locations down the East Coast. We also, and I'll talk about that in a minute, we also have teleservices that are available to parents anywhere.
Wow.
The wonderful news now is that it's possible to get expert support through Clarke and some of Clarke's sister organizations throughout the country, no matter where you live. And we now, I think since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we've all learned how to use Zoom and other remote technologies. And we've learned that one of the best ways to provide services to families with infants and toddlers especially is via teleservices. We have a program at Clarke called T-Visits, which really is our telepractice program that is started providing services for families with infants and toddlers and is now expanded to providing remote services for families with children of any age. But what we've learned from Clarke was a leader in beginning to use remote services almost 10 years ago. And we've been collecting a lot of data and analyzing how that's been going for the past decade. And one of the surprising things that we learned is that in many cases, children do better when the services are provided via teleservices than when they're provided in person. Wow. And at least as well, and sometimes better, I guess I'll say it that way. And we are pretty sure that we understand why that is, that the most important people in children's lives are their parents and caregivers. Mm-hmm. And if we can use telepractice and remote services to coach those parents and caregivers, then that hour once a week that we might spend with them gets multiplied, and the parents basically can carry out those strategies and activities throughout their week. And it seems that coaching parents, you are almost forced to be in a coaching mode when you're remote. You can't sort of jump in and take over as a therapist or teacher. You can't, put that hearing aid back in the little tiny ear. You can't rescue the parent. And so teleservices and remote services actually force us to get into a coaching mode and also allow other caregivers, other parents who may not be available at the time of early intervention, an intervention appointment, they can watch recordings of those sessions. They can join in from multiple locations. We've had grandparents participate from one part of the country along with the parents. So we're just seeing enormous benefits to teleservices. That's not to say that parents shouldn't also avail themselves of in-person services and really ensure that their child is getting all of the related services that they need. But we're very excited about the advantages, some of the advantages of teleservice, besides just reaching families that otherwise might not have geographic access.
I was just about to say that whole access is important. It takes away if your car isn't able to work or start, or you can't get a ride somewhere, or you can't get childcare for your other child, or you yourself are sick. It kind of takes those challenges and those barriers to getting the support weekly that you need, which is so important, that ongoing, consistent support and coaching. I've found the same thing in kind of our telehealth practice, and that the discussions I'm having with parents over Zoom are more intentional and more consistent than they are when I'm in the hospital, because there's so many distractions there. So I agree. It's one of those kind of beautiful things that have come out of the pandemic, and that's access to care and services.
Clarke has a specialty in working with families birth to 3, with that huge emphasis on parent support, parent education, and coaching. And then we offer preschool services for children who are really ready to transition into preschool if they really need that more intensive educational support. All of our locations have preschool programs specially designed for children who have hearing loss and a range of hearing losses, and who use a range of technology. Clarke's specialty is in teaching children who are deaf or hard of hearing to listen and talk. So we're really experts in helping parents to understand how to take advantage of those hearing aids and cochlear implants or other assistive technology that really gives access to sound and to spoken language. Our preschool programs, depending on the campus, go either through just before kindergarten or maybe a couple of years later. And then we have an enormous capacity to provide services to children that then turn to their public schools or enter their public schools and are being educated in mainstream settings in general education classrooms. So we provide teachers of the deaf in most of our locations. If those don't exist otherwise, we provide teachers of the deaf who go from school to school, classroom to classroom, and not only mentor and train the classroom teachers, but also really evaluate and keep an eye on how the children are doing, and sometimes provide direct services to those children to supplement what they're getting in their classrooms. So our goal is to eventually have children join their peers in their neighborhood schools and to be really successful, not just sort of getting by, but to really be able to fully access the educational services in their neighborhood.
Wow. As we come to a close, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about one of the kind of personal experiences you've had along your career in terms of working with children. And so I would love to ask you about a little girl who you were helping who had Usher syndrome, and if you could elaborate a little bit on that story.
Right. So one of the things I've been focusing on in the past couple of years, especially, is what we sometimes call deaf plus. So those children who have hearing loss in addition to other special needs, either due to a syndrome like Usher syndrome or for some other reason. And it turns out that almost 40% of children who have hearing loss have other special needs or other special medical conditions. And we are really now in a position to be able to provide enormous hope to those families as well, that their children can access spoken language and in many, many cases really thrive. And we have had a few children with Usher syndrome, but my wonderful story, recent story, is we had a little girl who was because of Usher's, was profoundly deaf, but was also pretty rapidly losing especially peripheral vision. And she was being taught to use a cane for orientation and mobility, but she didn't want to use it at school. She felt different from the other children, and she was really, really resistant to, practicing and getting to use that cane. And sort of a group of teachers and parent came together and said, the parents said, I have other canes. What if I brought those to school and gave them to all the children in the classroom? And what happened was she brought in all these canes, and this little girl became the expert, teaching the others how to use a cane and how to get around. And they were going on little nature walks where everybody was using a cane. And I actually saw a video of that, and you could not tell by looking at that video who was the child with Usher syndrome and who was a child who was just learning to use a cane because her friend had one. So that we always are looking for ways to have children feel included, and that their special needs are really just part of the diversity that we see. And we want them to be proud of the special technology or the special things they use, whether it's a hearing aid or a cane. I have one other great story. We had a little boy who had very complicated medical conditions that were associated with his hearing loss. And he required a feeding tube and really was not initially able to eat by mouth at all. When the kids had snack, he was being fed through a tube, and children had questions about it. And one of our teachers, one of our assistant teachers, came up with a plan to take one of the baby dolls in the doll corner and attach a little feeding tube. And as part of just the doll corner, here was this little doll that you could feed, pretend to feed with a tube. Again, sort of normalizing what could be seen as something atypical, and just having children be proud of whatever other things they need, whether it's a wheelchair, a feeding tube, a cane. And we want children to sort of be the experts almost in those devices, and for the other children to just see it as part of everyday experience.
It's so beautiful. It sounds like what you're doing is you're helping kids feel like kids, and you're getting really creative. And, as a child life specialist, we see time and time again that normalization, desensitization to all of these things, which could be seen as not normal or abnormal or different, become a part of your everyday life.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important for everyone to know too that Clarke is spelled with an E on the end.
That's
and
right.
That as you are looking and maybe wanting to check out the Clarke Schools and the services they offer, where's the best place for them to do that?
I think the best place to go would be Clarke's website, which is www.clarkeschools, Clarke with an E and school with an S at the end, clarkeschools.org. And again, we are specialists in working with families who really want their children to access sound and develop whatever spoken language abilities they possibly can. And we are always happy to answer parents' questions, or if we're not the right resource for them, to point them to those important resources.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you do now and the work that you have done, and this insight and expertise that you're giving to so many families and professionals that work with kids. So thank you for being here with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much for helping just to get information to families, and the work that you do is extraordinary.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you all so much for listening to Child Life on Call. If you head to our website, childlifeoncall.com, you're going to find all sorts of stuff there for parents, professionals, healthcare providers, child life specialists, no matter who you are. Actually, when you just go to our homepage, it'll help you direct to exactly where you need to go. On that, you'll find opportunities and PDUs for child life specialists, parents. We've got a starter kit for you, and clinicians. We even have a clinician course, which teaches you how to be a confident and capable caregiver in pediatrics. We're so grateful that you're here. Please DM us on Instagram. And like I mentioned, when you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.